Hi, Year Nines, how are you? Welcome back to week 4 English with Mrs. Gill. In this video, I'm going to explain how you can complete your week 4 work at home and what you need to do for each question. So our topic for week 4 is connecting the novel The Trenches to poems. So last week we connected the novel to historical documents such as actual historical facts about World War One and experiences in the trenches from real life soldiers written by to their family in letters or memoirs and things like that. So in this week, we're going to be looking at some poems. We're not going to be doing this as a unit where we examine the poem in a lot of detail. We're not going to be finding the rhyme scheme and similes and pulling all that stuff out. We're looking at the poem as a historical document. The two authors that I've picked, or the two poets, the two poets that I have picked is Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen. Both of those men were deployed in World War One and they were soldiers in World War One. So we're going to be using their poetry to see what messages they had about World War One. As per usual, set aside 3 hours to complete your English work this week, and also as usual, it is due by Friday afternoon, week 4. Thank you to those people who are getting better at submitting their work on time. However, there's still a few of you who are a little bit behind in their English work. You need to make sure that you're keeping up with your English and you're getting it to me via paper, taking a scan or a photo of your work if you're writing it, and then also emailing me the copy once you're done as well. So let's have a look at week 4. So week 4, we're going to start off with this guy called Siegfried Sassoon. So again, he was a World War One soldier that fought under the British Army. He went to France, which is very close to Belgium, where Billy is deployed in the story. So this is a background information about Sassoon. You need to highlight the key facts about him. So he is a famous British poet, especially a World War One poet. Highlight key facts about him, about his life there. From those key facts, you need to answer some multiple choice questions. What was his nickname? How did he feel about the government's involvement in the war? And where was he actually sent to during the war? Now that we've learned a bit of background information about Siegfried Sassoon, we're going to look at this very small poem that he wrote. So you can see that it is only 12 lines. It's not a huge poem, but there is quite a lot of meaning in it. So it's called Suicide in the Trenches. Your job is to obviously read the poem and then answer the questions. So how does he describe the soldier in lines 1 to 2? Explain in your own words. How does the soldier behave in the winter trenches? And in the third stanza, which means this part here, the third paragraph, who is Sassoon telling his message to? So who is he actually trying to get this message across to? Once you've had a go at those questions, I have this quote here from page 80. It's from the trenches, and it's when Rob dies, or it's when Billy finds out that Rob had been murdered or committed he had committed an act of treason and was punished with the death sentence. So looking at the idea of suicide, is this technically a type of suicide? How does the suicide that Siegfried talks about in his poem different from the suicide in the trenches? So comparing those two texts there. The second part of our poetry is looking at our second poet, Wilfred Owen. So Wilfred Owen is again another famous British World War One poet. His poems, however, are usually a lot longer. Owen, again, we have his background information here. He was not as involved as Sassoon was in the war. He definitely wasn't as active on the front line. He was injured a few times. And he actually was in hospital a lot when he wrote his poems. Um, Unfortunately, though, he did die. So a lot of the poems from Owen were published, and he became famous after his death. So writing these in hospital as a World War One soldier, he didn't actually realize the impact it would have now. And over 100 years later, we're still talking about his poems and how he conveyed the message of what actually was like on the front lines and in the trenches. So highlight the key facts about Owen here, and then answer these questions. What is the armistice? We learnt about the armistice last week. If you don't remember, you can always Google that word. So, it mentions that Owen. That should be Owen. Killed in action. So, what was the armistice? When did he die? This part here, only 5 poems were published in his lifetime, 2 that appeared anonymously. So we know already that Owen wrote a lot of his poems in hospital. However, he was concerned, unlike Sassoon, who was very open about, about up here, who was very open about how he didn't like what the government was doing. Owen was a little bit more reserved, so he was a little bit worried that if people found out that the poems were his, he may be punished or the government wouldn't like the message that he was trying to get across to others. So, why do you think some of his poems were published anonymously? Um, and then again, do you think Owen would have been you know, or did you think the British government would have been approving of what his message was in his poems? So now that we've looked at the background of Owen, again, we're going to look at his poem. Now, I did say that he likes bigger poems, and you can tell that his poem is a lot bigger. However, it's kind of like a story about the death of a man. So what you need to do is read this poem. It's called Dulce est decorum est, and that is Latin. It's not French or anything like that. And he does actually give a note down the bottom what that phrase means. So Dulce est decorum est pro patria mori. I don't speak Latin, so I don't know if I said that correctly, but it means it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. And it was from a famous Roman poet that he got that phrase. So that is the end of the poem, and it kind of ties in the whole message. So make sure you pay attention to that. What you need to do with this poem is find one example of each. So find an onomatopoeia. Remember, onomatopoeia is a sound word like crackle or gurgle. A metaphor saying something is or something is something else, and a simile saying something is like something else. So the easiest examples I give for metaphor and simile of the difference is if I was saying a simile, I would say my love is like a rose. So my love is like something else. It's similar to something else. If it was a metaphor, I would say my love is a rose. So my love is something else. Hopefully that helps. That may have confused some of you, but Google them if you don't know the definitions. And then the last one is a set of rhyming lines. So rhyming lines is the ending of the words. So you need to find a set of lines in the poem that rhyme with each other. Now, because this is such a long poem, what I have done is broken down parts of the poem itself. So the key quotes, I've taken them, they're just copied and pasted from the poem itself. And I've written out an everyday version of basically what is he trying to say in his poem. However, I've made it a little bit harder and done it as a mix and match activity. So, for example, in the poem, Owen says, bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we curse through the sludge. I found the matching one with that. If I was explaining this to someone normally without being so poetic, I would say the soldiers are bent over under the weight of their bags. They walk over the muddy ground, which is very tiring. They cough and swear as they walk because of their tiredness and their situation. So those two match there. What you need to do is find the bits from the poem itself and see if you can find the matching everyday explanation of its meaning. The last thing you need to do for your week 4 work is then understand Owen's poem. So lines 1 to 4, we're looking at line 13. How does the speaker describe the death of the man? What does the phrase, that we talked about before from the Roman poet, what does that mean? And then we're looking back at Billy. So when we read through the poem, we realize that Owen is describing the death of a man, and he's describing a mustard gas attack. So gas, gas, quick boys. And it's very similar to Billy's experience in the novel. So we know that Billy and Charlie were involved in a mustard gas attack in the novel. Billy unfortunately does get his mask on in time, so his lungs are saved, but his skin is actually burned from the mustard gas. It's caused severe skin damage to his arms. So, unfortunately, however, Owen describes that this troop is walking along, there's a mustard gas attack. Almost all of the men get their masks on quick enough. However, there is one man who, is yelling out in pain. It's like he's on fire with this invisible fire, which is the gas. And basically, Owen describes him drowning in his own fluid in his lungs, and links that to saying there's no well, in Owen's opinion, there's no honour to die fighting for your country. It's not sweet. It's not glory in the moment. In the moment of his death, there was nothing nice about that at all. It was probably more horrifying, and a sight that you don't ever get out of your mind. So whether this was a true this happened to Owen, we don't know, but this is what he's talking about in his poem. So now that we know that bit of the background about the poem, explain what Billy and Charlie experienced with the mustard gas. And number 8, I've given you some room to complete a little bit of research. So go onto Google or whatever you have available at home and take some notes about the gas attacks during World War One. What was mustard gas? How did it kill a person? And why did the Germans use mustard gas? If you don't have Google at home, there is enough knowledge and there is enough quotes and things from the trenches for you to understand that. So all you have to do is answer those questions down here and tell me what you found out about mustard gas. That is all your work for week 4. It seems like a lot, but a lot of it is a lot of reading and highlighting. So there's not actually a lot of written questions for you to complete this week and no creative writing. Please email me if you have any questions. Remember, again, due Friday week 4. Try and get it to me as best as you can on time with as much completed as you can. Have a good week, guys, and I will see you soon when we all come back to school.